Lammy's on a roll. His even more baffling was his decision to get Britain to sanction two Israeli ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, for alleged repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities. Now, they're hardliners, these two guys. They are keen on stopping aid to Gaza. By the way, there are multiple reasons to do that. And they want to resettle Palestinians outside of the Gaza Strip. So they're hardline, but they're elected members of the Israeli government. Britain has joined other virtue-signalling countries, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Norway, in sanctioning these two guys. They're now banned from entering Britain. I'm not sure if they had any plans to come here anyway. And their assets, should they have any in Britain, are frozen. So it's very performative, virtue halo polishing sort of thing. But what does it achieve? What is the point of this? Let's ask former Jewish Chronicle editor, now columnist at The Telegraph, The Mail, you name it, he's in it, Jake Wallis Simons. Hi, Jake.
Hello, good evening.
What does he think he's playing at, or what do Britain think they're playing at with this? You know, we're all particularly used to Labour politicians in particular, as I say, polishing their halos, and, oh, poor Palestinians, or, you know, Israel bad, Palestinians good. That's the Labour line, basically. But, you know, in a pragmatic, realistic world, this was a ridiculous thing to do. All we've done is alienate and infuriate our ally Israel and also America. America's seething about this. What do you think is behind Lammy doing this?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I mean, you know, Itamar, Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, look, let's be frank, they're morons. You know, they've done more damage to Israel's image overseas than any two other people around living at the moment by their ridiculous extremist comments. But look, they don't make decisions about the war. They don't have power over Israel's war effort. They're morons. But look, if you're going to sanction morons amongst our allies, there's a lot of morons in the Middle East. Let's face it. You know, for example,
it's a global problem, Jake.
It's a global problem, but particularly in the Middle East. I mean, look, you know, the leader of Turkey, President Erdogan, he's turned it into an Islamist thugocracy or theocracy. He harbours Hamas, and he said about Israelis that they are only satisfied by sucking children's blood. Okay, he's a NATO ally. Do we sanction him? No, we don't. Tunisia's president, Kais Saied, you know, he's not a massive ally of ours, but we have bilateral trade of more than 750 million. There's a Tunisian delegation at London Tech Week at the moment. He has explicitly renounced the two-state solution, instead calling for all the land of Palestine for the Arabs. And he's described the Abraham Accords, the peace deal that Israel has with Arab countries, as high treason. Do we sanction him? No, we don't. Do I need to mention Qatar, by the way? That petro state, the slave state, the global capital of slavery at the moment. We enjoy 5.6 billion of trade last year. It owns 100 billion pounds of our assets in Britain. And it incites, it's the main funder of Hamas and incites against Israel through Al Jazeera all the time. We don't sanction them either. To me, this feels like an extension of the Lucy Connolly effect, you know. Lucy Connolly, of course, received 31 months in prison. Totally disproportionate. Of course, her tweet was nasty, while, you know, rapists, terrorist fundraisers and other assorted nasties have had far lighter sentences. It's this sort of offence at what people say on only on what, you know, we don't take offence at what the Islamists say, only on what our own side says, applied to foreign policy. That, I think, is kind of what Labour is doing at the moment.
Absolutely. Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio urged the UK and the other nations not to forget who the real enemy is. A rather good point, I would have thought. He added, these sanctions do not advance US-led efforts to achieve a ceasefire, bring all the hostages home and end the war. Meanwhile, Israel furiously responded, it is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to these kind of measures. Before we go on, Jake, let's have a look at Lammy in action on this issue.
These two individuals, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, have been inciting violence against Palestinian people for months and months and months. They have been encouraging egregious abuses of human rights.
Well, there you are. That was him on ITV News. Again, you know, America and indeed Israel making it very clear that the only thing these sanctions have achieved is potentially to hamper the negotiations towards a potential ceasefire. So again, you know, I'm sure that Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich had a few plans to come to Britain. I bet the farm on the fact they haven't got any assets here, and yet we froze their assets and banned them from Britain, which is purely performative. Why? Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing about Lammy's idiotic sanctioning of those two morons, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, is that the war is almost won. Hamas they've lost all their leadership. They're almost destroyed. They're being pressured, according to various sources, to come close to a deal. They might be on the brink of giving up the hostages and admitting defeat, which is what would end the war. And yet they look overseas and they see Britain sanctioning Israel rather than Hamas. Rather than calling on Hamas to surrender, it's taking out its wrath on Israel. The Prime Minister called Israel appalling just last week, not the jihadis, but Israel, and moving towards unilaterally recognizing a state of Palestine. Hamas negotiators see that and think, you know what, let's carry on the war because Israel might be pressured to stop without us having to give up our hostages and without us having to go into exile and admit defeat and surrender. So actually, Lammy's foreign policy is extending this war, it's emboldening Hamas, and it's causing the deaths of more Palestinians and more Israeli troops. That is what British foreign policy is doing at the moment. He should hang his head in shame. It's creating the opposite result from the one that he claims to want. All this virtue signalling is actually causing death in real life.
And what do you think is behind that? Do you think this is Labour putting its old clothes on again, its Corbyn-style clothes? Do you think in Labour's DNA is an inherent dislike of Israel? Because I kind of think that is the case.
Look, it could very well be the case, but certainly what we can see is that Labour is under huge electoral pressure from its Muslim base, who are turning in their droves to these Gaza independents and taking out their anger against Labour for the paltry amount of support it has managed to muster for Israel. And Labour has gradually been shifting its position step by step away from support for Israel and towards hostility towards Israel. It's not been an instant U-turn. It's been a step-by-step slow burn of a U-turn. It started with suspending those arms licenses, those 30 arms licenses last year. It's gone through various other steps, voting against Israel at the UN. We had Britain suspending those trade discussions a couple of weeks ago and coming out calling Israel appalling last week. Now we've got sanctioning. We're leading up towards the recognition of a Palestinian state. All of this is going to slowly be influencing, or so Labour hopes, influencing Muslim voters to think, you know what, maybe I'll go back and start voting Labour again rather than hemorrhaging support to the independents. I think it's domestic politics, it's desperation from Starmer, and meanwhile he's selling all of his morality and Britain's foreign policy down the river.
Yeah, well, because straight after October the 7th, when Starmer, to his credit, you know, came right out in support of Israel, but you could tell then that the Labour government, while supporting Israel, was not that comfortable in that position. Now they're in a position where they're condemning it. It's like they're on their home territory. They're much more comfortable about this. Lammy, enthusiastic in his condemnation. This is what worries me. I can't let you go, Jake, without a few words on our friend, the Doom Goblin, Greta Thunberg. The funniest thing I thought about this Freedom Flotilla was that although the cargo they had on board, the aid, to be fair, was performative, symbolic, but apparently they'd eaten most of it. so the actual Greta and her 11 friends had eaten most of the food anyway. But when they got there, there were two things that you could argue. Look, we're helping Greta win here by talking about her, but she thinks, oh well, I've raised awareness about the issue. We're fully aware of the issue, Greta. We don't need you to do this. We know it's all about you. We know, as the Israelis quite brilliantly described described your boat, it was nothing more than a selfie yacht. It's all about you. We know that. But the fact that we're talking about you, Greta, isn't a victory for you, because we're talking about you in contemptuous terms, the utmost contemptuous terms. And there are two things that I think deserve serious contempt. One is her disgusting use of the word kidnap. The Israelis have kidnapped us. Actually, what the Israeli Navy was doing was saving their damn lives, because if they got anywhere near Gaza, they would not have survived. The Israeli Navy then very nicely took them into a nice peaceful Israeli port. And the next disgusting move by this Scandinavian weirdo woman was this, in my view, refusing to watch the 43-minute film of what happened on October the 7th, what Hamas did. Why do you think she refused to watch it?
Well, because she's closing her eyes to reality, because reality doesn't conform to her view of the world. It's as simple as that. But you're right. I mean, Israel did save her life. You know, in 2008, an Italian activist made his way to Gaza, ended up being kidnapped and strangled with a plastic cord by some Salafists over there. So, you know, the same fate may very well have ended up being hers. But look, two things I would say. The first thing is this, you know, her use of the word kidnapped is, of course, the most repellent and offensive and disgusting thing that she's done in her short but repellent career. But, you know, this is the only kidnap that I've ever seen where the kidnappers are more keen to get rid of her than they were to get her in the first place. She was out of the country within 24 hours. So, you know, not much of a kidnap. But the other thing I would say, I don't know if you've seen the footage recently, it was just around over the last few hours, her walking through the airport flanked by police officers, her hands by her sides in normal fashion. As soon as she catches sight of the media cameras, she puts her hands behind her back as if she's been handcuffed. I mean, it's absolutely hysterical. It's just performance after performance. It's not about the Palestinians. It's not about the Israelis. It's about Greta Thunberg. So much is clear by the way that she culturally appropriates the Palestinian scarf, the keffiyeh, and puts it on when she wouldn't culturally appropriate a sombrero. You know, she is hugely offensive and just really just deserves to be condemned and criticised and mocked.
Well, if she'd have spent more of her youth at school, then she'd be more educated and perhaps not quite so stupid. But she unfortunately spent her entire youth sitting outside the Swedish government protesting about climate change. And of course, she's moved on to Palestine after the disappointment of her prediction that humanity would be destroyed by climate change in 2023. So she's had to go to pastures new. You've got to give her that. It is pathetic, but I think it's worth stressing that I don't think she has achieved anything at all, and this was above her pay grade. She must be persuaded never to do anything like this again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, though, on a serious note, she's a hero to many, many young people. You know, when she put out that video calling for support to free her from the kidnapping that she apparently had suffered at the hand of the Israelis, that caused demonstrations in Stockholm outside the government buildings. And not only that, but the Swedish hotline for Swedes abroad who are in trouble was jammed by thousands of callers demanding that they act to free Greta Thunberg, meaning the actual Swedes overseas who needed help weren't able to get through. This is the effect that she has. She has a huge fan base, so she's very easy for you and I to mock because we can see through her and she's, you know, idiotic and cretinous. But a lot of people are taken in by this stuff, and she speaks for many, many hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of activists who are all leading our country into a very difficult place indeed.
You're right. She should be taken seriously because she is dangerous. You're absolutely right. Jake, fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. That's Jake Wallis Simons, former editor of the Jewish Chronicle, now writes, well, he's an author as well, and he has written a book called Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It.